me back. I really enjoyed our connection last year and look forward to the opportunity to have a rich and powerful discussion this year. And I'm so great to see Maddie and Ava here. Thank you for welcoming me, because I think it is always important to have those conversations driven by the next generation of leaders. And that, as Dr. Slaughther always says, we can share some of the wisdom that we have, but it's always good to have the perspectives, the views, the energy and excitement of the younger generation. So I do appreciate that. As you mentioned, I'm James Sledge. I'm an educator is what I generally say, but I'm an organizer. I'm a labor rights advocate. I do it globally. I work for the American Center for International Labor Solidarity, which we also call commonly the Solidarity Center, and we work in about 70 countries. And what we do is advocate for decent pay for workers, for better working conditions. We try to bring in that whole perspective as we talk about Dr. King of why labor is important, and make that connection between enriching the full lives of people and all that they bring into their workspace, and to make sure that the workspaces that they're in value them and treat them fairly, equitably, and that's, so basically I can get into it more about how I entered labor, but that is who I am. So anyway, thank you for having me here this morning. I look forward to our conversation about King and whether we go from chaos or community. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sledge. Now, Dr. Slaughther, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, I will. I also, like Mr. Sledge, am someone who professes to be an educator. My path was as a teacher, then a principal, a central office administrator, and a program director before having the wonderful opportunity to meet Mr. Sledge when we were doing our work together down in Washington, D.C. So now that I am somewhat retired, I am delighted to continue to participate in conversations such as these with young people such as yourselves, because your task is to carry on from where we left off. Ours was to carry on from where those before us left off. So we keep trying to pass down this generational wealth and this generational knowledge so that you can carry on and do the work. So I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to come and talk with you, because my goal is to learn more than I teach in this moment, because I think you have quite a bit to teach. And whether you think you're teaching or not, let me tell you, you are teaching. And if you have that as your mindset, you will indeed teach. So I'm looking to have this conversation with the new leaders of the movement. Thank you.
So if I may kind of ask the first question. So Dr. Slaughther, you are an educator, and we were wondering what kind of age groups you usually teach, because I know that as a middle school student, social injustice is a big thing, whether that be race, religion, gender. It's all over middle school, and we were wondering in what age groups you teach and how you can see social injustice in those age groups.
Wow. You know, the interesting issue that you raise is one that talks about this sense of injustice. And quite honestly, it happens regardless of one's age. You can see elderly people saying that they've been mistreated by people who are younger than them. They won't hire me to do certain work because they think I'm too old. They won't, they dismiss me because they don't think I know what I'm talking about. Go on the other end. Young people say these older people won't let me in. They won't give me an opportunity. They won't give me a chance. So I have to tell you, discrimination happens regardless of age. People will always figure out a way to be discriminating. Now, the age group that I mostly worked with I worked in kindergarten through grade 12 in my career. Middle school happens to be a particularly tough time because I think all of us in that, which we often call the latency years, people are just trying to figure out, am I a child or am I an adult? How do I go from here to there? And if there were ever a group in the world who would say, where do we go from here, chaos or community, it would be middle schoolers, because there's a lot to your age and a lot that happens in your age. And there's a lot educationally that happens, because now we go from what looked like a newsletter to something that looks like a newspaper, something that looked like a regular math lesson to pre-algebra. So, I mean, things change tremendously at this time, and people often get involved in sort of discriminating against each other. So I would say it's going to get better. I'm like Dr. King on that one. It's got to get better. It's going to. Okay.
If I can interject for a second, I think, Ava, that was such a fantastic question. It also brings to mind to me, when we're thinking about K through 12 and we reflect on Dr. King's book. So I'm just going to jump right into talking about some of the disparities. He highlighted that the cost, or I would say the amount of money in which pupils were getting. So African Americans at the time, and keep in mind, the set for this is now you're starting to have a lot more African Americans moving into more, I would say, central locations and not necessarily on farms, so they can be closer to manufacturing jobs. And so the United States has to figure out how to make sure everyone is getting, educated. And in his book, he talked about the disparities between the federal government giving $250 per African-American student, but anywhere from $450 to $600, over $600 per pupil for white students. When you're looking at your K through 12 careers, you're looking at these different communities. How does this impact one's growth and progress? And from what you all see today, because you're outside of kind of the education system, how do you see that permeating to this day, that gap and what that does? And Ava and Maddie, for you, I want you all to think about and give us a perspective, knowing this information. How are these disparities being played out in front of your eyes, in your community, in your classrooms?
So Ava and I actually go to the same school, and the school we go to is a gifted magnet school. The school is specifically designed for gifted kids because we learn in a different way. But when you look at a classroom at the school, or just a class in general, it is usually pretty obvious the not necessarily lack of, because there's definitely diversity, but there isn't as much diversity as I would like there to be. And I feel like we've definitely come a long way from schools being completely segregated. In public schools now, are a lot more, I'm not sure if inclusive is exactly the right word, but everyone is required to go to a public school. The school itself isn't going to tell you that you can't go to the school because of this, but programs, a lot of programs might still have that. And I feel like, Miss Tina, what you've created, the space you've created, is a very essential thing, because you focus on minorities and you focus on educating those minorities, because we still haven't gotten to the place where minorities are, I don't want to say not so much minorities, because a minority is always going to be a minority, but not so much treated and recognizable as your stereotypical minority.
I agree, because as far as we've come, I still see examples every day of things that I think should have been solved long ago. And that, yes, we've come a long way, and their schools are a lot more inclusive. And like Maddie said, they won't just tell you no straight off. But there are those people who feel like they'll never belong, because even though they may not say it outright, it's always going to be there, and you're always going to feel like a little bit of an outsider.
So Dr. Slaughther and Mr. Sledge, I mean, your reaction to this, especially with you all being former educators and with the work that you're doing today, how is it different than what King talked about? Or what differences do you see?
Well, I think it's interesting to go back to the part of the original question that you asked about middle school and school period, talking about school funding. And I always like to say I talk about experiences through stories. And I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, in a place called Halifax County in Eastern North Carolina, which still ranks today as probably one of the poorest counties in North Carolina, if you start looking by definition of economics and family earning in that particular area. That's part of the kind of what we call the black belt of that part of North Carolina. And you think about schools, and schools were, basically they were underfunded, under-resourced. There's a lack of attracting quality teachers now. You don't have higher level of math and science courses available. Opportunities are really limited. They don't attract the attention that you get in larger, more affluent areas, and there aren't opportunities for networking for students. And so sometimes when we think about King, and we limit it to looking at race relations, but the whole conversation is really about race relations. Absolutely. It was also about the inequality that exists, the inequity that exists, and how one group was offered opportunities and another group was not. And we see that play out in various ways. We see that in schools, and that's where the challenge starts to become. I particularly was listening to Maddie and Ava talk about middle school, because that's where you begin to kind of shape your philosophy. You kind of shape your thinking. You kind of start to get involved in activities. You get involved in, whether it's student council, you get involved in clubs, you get them, and you start to really think differently about what you're seeing, how you're seeing it, how you're processing it. And that is when we get into the how we process things that make us question, because as they have the opportunity in a magnet school that has the resources available, but you probably see the difference between that school and some other schools that may be in that you don't attend, and the opportunities that are available to them. So that's when we begin to see it actually kind of materialize and crystallize, and we begin to shape our own thinking around what it means to see inequity and how it plays out in our own lives and in our own worlds.
Dr. Slaughther, any
Yes.
comments?
Yes, I actually have a couple of comments. Number one, I just like the way you all, Maddie and Ava, are both making a distinction about how you see privilege playing out. You see there is a difference, and look, in no larger place do you see it than being in a magnet school for the gifted. You are a part of the privilege, if you will, on some level, and that's a great thing. Now the question becomes, what do you do with that privilege? Because you see, if having privilege is like a bank account, then how do I spend down some of my bank account for other people? Dr. King, in his wisdom, Dr. King was a brilliant man. I mean, going to college at 15 or 16 years old and going on to get his PhD and so forth at a time where that was not necessarily the norm, suggested that he was privileged in terms of his ability to do things academically. The question is, what did he do with it? You see, he went immediately to the poor people. He went to people who did not have what he had. And what he noticed was that there was a difference in how people were treated. And he said, as long as I can see that there is disparity, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that everyone else gets taken care of. So my hope is that you will take the privilege that you have and do something with it for others. Remember, when King asks us, are we going for chaos or community? I'm thinking that the answer that he wanted us to say was community. And so how do we get toward community? How do we all get together? And so I think one of the interesting things is even as I look at particularly all that is happening in Washington, D.C. and all of the chaos that is there in governing this country, I keep thinking, gosh, if they only had the mindset of community, how much differently things would look in that place where laws are being made, how much differently things would look in terms of education, because they say, wow, everybody needs to be educated. Remember, when this country was founded, people were coming out of something that looked very different. They said, we don't want only the aristocrats ruling, we actually want a democracy where everybody participates in running the country. And if you're going to have everybody participate, then that means not only a few people can be educated, but everyone is educated. Hence, we say, well, let's have public education so that everybody can participate in the democratic process. So I think that Dr. King was doing kind of like you were doing, Ava. You said, I see a difference here. So what am I going to do with this difference? And there we go at trying to address the differences.
Before we move on to Ava, you and Maddie's next question, I just wanted to just take a little bit of a sidebar because we're talking about at what age, sometimes people say, well, what age is the right age to, advocate for change? Dr. Slaughther, how old were some of the freedom riders?
They were high schoolers. Yeah, absolutely. They were young people. I mean, and young and brave young people who just said, I can do it. And that's what we mean when we say the energy of the youth, because you all can say, look, I can do anything. And we love that. We love that. See, sometimes as we get older, we keep thinking we can't do everything. But when I was your age, I just thought that there was nothing I couldn't handle. So you're at the right age. Yes, you are. And as long as you can see that there's a difference in how people are treated and how people are being, you're at the place to see it and do something about it.
It's a great point. And I just wanted to reiterate something that came out of the book that's related to what Dr. Slaughther said in terms of us talking about privilege and the inequities that exist. And as I said, we have to make that leap in understanding fully what King's message was. It was about the differences in the way that privileged were treated, and that was about how white people were treated during the time. But the quote was something in our book, as you go back and reflect on it, says whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. And I thought that was just an important piece to reflect on, because whatever that inequity is, however we see our privilege, it is our role. It is our role to take advantage of opportunities and re-educate ourselves, as he said, to lessen that disparity, to remove those barriers, to create opportunities for other people to be lifted, and to create this level playing field. I think that's a piece in the book. So to go back to Chaos or Community, that was an important quote that he made, because unfortunately the challenge is always on those who are not privileged to rise up from where you are, but we do not place the same amount of pressure on those who are privileged, and to say to them, this is also, you are equally engaged. You must be equally engaged in this fight. It is your responsibility also to work to eradicate the differences that exist based on whatever these reasons are, whether it's religion or gender or sexuality or whatever those reasons, race, whatever it is.
Perfect. Thank you. So Ava and Maddie, on to your next question. And I just want to remind those that are actually in the Zoom room with us, if you have any questions or any comments, please, you can raise your hand and you will come from hiding, as I would say, so we can see your face and ask your question, be a part of the conversation, or please feel free to drop them in the chat box. Okay, Ava and Maddie, over to you.
So kind of going back to something that Dr. Slaughther said about kind of like, when is it the right time to start advocating for change? Personally, I believe that we start noticing injustices or things that are unfair from a very, very early age. And I've noticed that, and I work with children a lot, that they tend to be a lot more unbiased than teenagers or adults, because as teenagers and adults, we've kind of built more stereotypes around things. We've built more of even though we're taught not to judge a book by its cover per se, we still subconsciously judge a book by its cover, if you will. And I think that from a very early age, especially myself, I've always been a feminist, if you will. And I've always kind of listened to music that empowered girls and empowered people of minorities to still strive to make a change. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of developed a deeper understanding, especially in middle school where everything is changing and you're actually able to grasp some harder context and kind of speak your opinion on them and be educated on them enough to do so. And with that, I've developed more of a passion for wanting to make a change, and Miss Tina probably knows this quite well by now, but I want to have a career in the field of diversity and inclusion. And with that, specifically right now, I'm actually looking at journalism and activism. And I wanted to ask both of you what advice you have towards these young people that have an opinion and have things to say, and how we can say them, but while still being protected, because the world can be a very, very harsh place, and there's still needs to be kind of not necessarily like a barrier, but something that, like a line that shouldn't be crossed, if you will. So yeah, my question is kind of just what advice you have towards the young people who want to make a change and want to use their voice and talk.
Dr. Slaughther or Mr. James? Who wants to go first?
Okay, my unmuting thing was going a little slow there. Now I find it very interesting. Wait a minute, you all both said you're in middle school, right?
Yes, sir. We were both in the same grade.
That is amazing. I don't know that I was this. Were you, Sledge? Were you this mature at middle school? I don't think I had it quite like this. So this,
Of course, I was a precocious child. Of course, I was.
yeah, of course you were. Of course. And see, the thing for me is, I'm so impressed with the way you're thinking. Your body politic is out there. I mean, you're already thinking like this. And are you a part of the journalism structure at school? I mean, are you already writing in the paper or on student council? Are you handling the business already where you are?
I know for myself, I am taking a creative writing course, and we do have a student council. I lost the election this year, however, but the past 4 or 5 years I was on student council, and Ava's part of a very small group, I think. It's kind of a club, and Ava likes to write like stories and stuff, so that's what she does writing wise.
Go ahead, Sledge. I know you are you chomping at the bit, because I'm trying to just let them.
I was just
they're in it right now.
Right, absolutely. Well, I just heard her, ask about, timing and how to get engaged and how to get involved in. And what I say is, like, one of the, another quote the King used, the time is always right to do what is right. And I think we process things at a different time and in a different place, and our experiences are different. So the experience that you may have now in middle school may evolve to a different experience that you'll have later. So what I think is important is that you take the opportunity to process it where you are, to write about it where you are, to write about how it affects you where you are, to write about how it impacts you where you are. And that will influence, and that can be used to influence others to see an issue very differently, perhaps, than they had already seen it. I think journalists, Slaughther and I used to, and I still do. I do a lot of training, and one of the things when I put newsprint there, I hold on to my marker, because I said the person who has the pen has the power. So I control what goes on the board. I control what people see. And because they see it, they visualize it, they remember it, and they take it away from that space. That's what you do as a journalist. That's what you do as a writer. You take those things that you process, and as people read them, it begins to help them shape their own thinking around those particular issues. That is why journalists and newsmakers have so much power. So tap into it where you are, and don't think about, like, well, my experience will be different when I see something. Write about it where you are. because there are others who may not be where you are. There are others who may be a little further along than you are in their thinking about it, but it gives you the opportunity to help shape, to help craft, to help create the thinking around that particular issue, and to draw others into it to process it just as you have done.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. I think that's outstanding, the way you phrased that, Sledge, because see, one of the things that I think about is when we write, was it Benjamin Franklin who said the pen is mightier than the sword, or somebody? I can't remember who it was, but I mean it's a big statement, because when you write, you really do control the narrative, and so to the extent that you all can, I would make sure that I'm studying writing, looking at good writers. I'm so impressed by newspaper writers, these journalists, particularly the people who do these various editorials and so forth, who get an opinion out there in the world, or tell the story of how something happened in the world. So I would certainly make sure that I'm up on that, because you know what, as you are in this privileged class, you are the ones who are going to be doing the writing. Yeah, see, not everybody writes. Not everybody is going to get the chance to write. So you have that opportunity. And Dr. King, when he sat down and wrote this book particularly, he knew that giving speeches is not going to do the trick. He's it's a nice thing, but I've got to sit down and write. As a matter of fact, it was this book that King went on hiatus for. He went.
He did.
Yeah, he went to the islands. Sit down and write. Yeah,
we went to the islands for a year. So because this was actually going to be, I think, his last book. And most people thought, oh, he's going to do a memoir, right? And he was going to go and talk to all these famous people that he had developed a connection or relationship over the years. And he was very intentional in not doing that. And he wanted to chronicle the period in time of what he had experienced and what was happening at the moment. And I mean, there's a lot of foreshadowing, but there was also some predictions as well. But he laid a blueprint. So if you read the book, and I suggest this is something I read every year, or I listen to it if you have Audible, but it's a blueprint to how you need to think about where you are, what you need to act. So I'm going to just step in a little bit, Maddie and Ava. I definitely want to hear your voice as well. But how you proceed going forward, especially at your tender age. I said the fact that you all are not the 2 hour horror, but the fact that you're a part of heritage. We protect, but also we challenge and we push, i.e., that's why you all are part of this conversation, right? Also find other groups where there's like minds and vet them, because that's also, if you are an individual and you're standing alone, then it's easier for you to be attacked. But once your ideology, your value system, your value structure, so find other groups of people that's also just as James would say, precocious in finding out more information, but you do it together, right? And when your voices are combined together, it becomes a thunder, right? So, if you look at just from a political standpoint, how a lot of the politicians, they go after the youth because the youth is starting to drive the change and the messaging. And I do like the point in which both, Dr. Slaughther and Mr. Sledge talked about just write it down. Sometimes we have revisionist history. Or if you don't write your thoughts down, you have gaslighting. And you understand exactly what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're passionate about. So get into, I would say, so some advice, get involved in other organizations that are like-minded. Make sure that the adults or the leaders are around are also those that are protect and they understand and they can do the due diligence and what environments that you will go into, that you can, exercise your voice and your rights. Make sure that you're writing down your blueprint. And as you start to look around other, I would say other groups of people that are not as confident in being able to push what is right and to push a lot of the things that Dr. King's talking about. I will always say lead with empathy. Always put yourself in someone else's shoes to see what they are going through. I have a friend that's leading an empathy revolution now. Mine is about being intentional. And I think those two things, possibly some others, is what Dr. King, that's what his whole nature was around. And that's the reason why he fought, because he felt empathy, not just sympathy, and wanted to see that change. But Ava, I want to bring you into this dialogue. So let's hear your thoughts. What's on your mind as it relates to the question at hand?
So I think, honestly, for the future, there is a quote by Martin Luther King that says, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. And I think that really applies today, honestly, especially with all of these new issues that are arising and even some of the old issues that have resurfaced. And I think that we need to know the truth. We need to write it down. We need to examine sources. And that we also need to band together as a community. And in his book, Martin Luther King talks about this idea of the world house, where we're all together, and that's how we're so strong, is when we come together and we make the world a home for everyone. And I think that's what we need to do for the future.
Perfect.
And
I couldn't agree more. Yes, Maddie?
I want to add on to that a little bit too. So in the quote, Martin Luther King says, unarmed truth. And I feel like truth now, it's not necessarily uncommon to find a news source that is biased in some way. And it might be very, very hard to see that source is biased, and might take a while for someone to realize it. And then you see on social media, like Twitter, people tweeting about how 13 News Now is obviously very biased or whatever. That's just an example. But I feel like we actually still have a ways to go to actually accomplish unarmed truth. And the people that do tell the complete unarmed truth, if you will, are very often almost put down, or those people are discriminated against, because the truth is pretty often something that people don't want to hear.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And just thank you both for just your perspective around that. And oftentimes I feel that we are in a regressive state, right? So that's why it's important to write your truth, lay out your blueprint of what you want to do, as well as those others around you. But I definitely want to turn this back over to you so you can continue to ask your questions to Mr. Sledge and Dr. Slaughther.
Well,
And we only have about 10 more minutes left. Yeah. It goes by pretty fast.
It does. I want to say, though, as you talk about that, truth is really important that we think about what is the truth, and regardless of what others say, there's a quote that truth is always present. You have different versions of what people say and think, but the truth is always present. And it was King who talked about how others looked at different perspectives of of the situation they were in. And he often quoted that James Russell Lowell poem, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet the scaffold sways the future. It is the scaffold. It is the truth that is always standing. It's the truth that is always present. It is the truth that is always guiding, yet the scaffold sways the future. I mean, he said, behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. That's the preacher king. Because he looked at basically like truth was being on the cross and being crucified there, but is the truth that is always going to stand, is the truth that is going to be revived, is the truth, quote unquote, the preacher king that's going to be resurrected at all times. And that we cannot, that even though it seems like truth is not winning at the moment, it is still that truth that's present. It is still that truth that sways the future. It is still that truth that will prevail in the end. So as we think about truth, I wanted to share that from King.
Perfect. Either Maddie, but there's a question that it's been burning, particularly for Maddie and Ava. When we asked you if you could be a part of, this conversation, this dialogue, what did you know about King at that time? What did you learn about King in your research preparing? And how do you see yourself differently now with that new context of who he is or was?
My experience, and I'm sure many other people that have gone through the school system's experience, is that when you are in elementary school and even throughout middle school somewhat, they educate you on Martin Luther King in the way of, we're not going to have school on Monday because it's Martin Luther King Day. Who was this guy? He said I have the dream speech, and then you have a bunch of 9-year-olds like, oh yeah, my mom told me about that, or I saw that on YouTube. And I feel like we don't really, in school, talk about the things that are less common about people, especially people that it's almost like an expectation. It's like ever since first grade, when it was Martin Luther King Day, we talked about Martin Luther King. When it was Black History Month, we talked about Martin Luther King. We talked about Rosa Parks. We talked about Harriet Tubman and slavery. And I feel like really up until like 6th grade, that's like all that was kind of the extent of my knowledge, that he was alive during the civil rights movement, he played a big part of it, and he is an iconic figure. And then I feel like in 6th grade, as I said earlier, how in middle school we develop more of an understanding and we develop an opinion and the voice to be able to use that opinion. In 6th grade, we had it was called an eminent person project, where you had to write an essay on someone that you found eminent. And there was actually a list of people that we couldn't use. And because it was so common to have people talk about that person. And Martin Luther King was actually on that list. And I thought about it and I was like, he's so iconic. Why can't I just talk about him more? And so that's when I kind of did a little bit more digging, and that we were also talking about the civil rights movement at the time. And I feel like in that time, I kind of had like a realization that school can't cover everything at all. Like, school will never be able to teach me everything, and I'm not ever going to be able to know everything, but I'm going to learn as much as I can. And so I feel like I kind of took that and I looked more into the armed truth and tried to find the unarmed truth in that. Because school also it's very common for them to kind of sugarcoat some things. And I feel like since 6th grade, I've learned more about how MLK not only was a civil rights activist, but how the way that he built a community through all of the chaos that was happening, the way that he built a community, because in my opinion, where there is community, there is going to be chaos. It is community and chaos. The way he built that was through being empathetic, not sympathetic, because sympathetic is like, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Empathetic is understanding that we are, especially him, minorities were all in the situation together and that it was wrong and that something needed to be done. And so he took his voice, he took a pen and paper, he took the media, and he built a community of people who understood one another, of people who he told people that violence is not the answer. He was huge on nonviolence. And he kind of took that, and from learning that on, that's the way that I've tried to express myself and my opinions. I prefer to talk something out with someone in a regular tone rather than yelling and it becoming more aggressive, because that is the way that people come together and form more of a community, even in times of great chaos.
Perfect. Well stated. Ava.
Yeah, like Maddie said, I feel like through elementary school, we learned about him, but I could probably, like, back in elementary school, I could probably state like 5 facts about him. And those were the basic ones, because we never really dived into who he was as a person, as an activist. We were told he was an activist, but we never really got to see what he did. And then in middle school, I honestly feel like, yes, for 6th grade, we were in the pandemic, but when we got to 7th grade and COVID was kind of on the downfall, and I feel like my horizons just opened so much more. I found HSCF, and I started getting interested in all these people and really what they did. And I think through this experience, when I read the book, I was amazed by all of the ideas that he had that I had never heard about before, and that would actually be able to apply today. And that, like Maddie said, I don't think it's chaos and community. I don't think it's chaos and community, though. I think it's chaos and then community. Because I think that in order to get to the concept of the world house that he'd envisioned for the future, that we have to go through the fire and then we go to community. But I honestly just think my perspective of him and so many other people in the civil rights community, the LGBTQ community, the women's rights community, is all just changed so much.
Wow, well said. And it's hard to believe we have 5 minutes left. So we're actually in our wrap. Before I give my closing comments, I just want to thank both of you, Maddie and Ava. We could go on for another hour because I feel like you all are just getting warmed up to the conversation, and that's where the true essence comes out. But I think we captured a lot. And I also want to thank Dr. Slaughther and Mr. Sledge, but I want to turn it over to the two of you for closing comments. You know, we kicked this off as having an intergenerational conversation, really unpacking the last book that Dr. King wrote, where do we go from here? Chaos of Community. And really diving into blossoming who he is, who he was. And I still feel like who he is, because whenever you read anything that he has written, in particular this book, it's a blueprint as if it could have been written for today. So what I would say, pearls of wisdom or information that you will offer the youth today, as well as those that are older, that's thinking about what they're seeing, what they're hearing, the circles that they're in, about the truth and how they stand in truth, and how do we lead towards change? And I will start with you, Dr. Slaughther, and I will end with you, Mr. Sledge, Ava, and Maddie. I'll give you last comments and then I'll close.
Okay, I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. And one of the things that I'm curious about is, why was there not an HSCF when I was a middle schooler? That's the first thing I was trying to figure out. I said, well,
I was still, I think I wasn't born yet.
and I said, I wonder, are they brilliant because of being a part of HSCF, or is HSCF the brilliant place because of them? So it's kind of interesting how you all have come into community with each other. And the point that I really wanted to make out of that is that you all are doing exceptional work, and it gives me such encouragement that we have left. Our generation has done something to leave some sort of legacy for you to grab onto, so that you can do the work that's ahead for you. And I think that we'll always say, if I had only known then what I know now. And you probably even say it for your short lives. I know that for my life that's a little longer, I keep saying that if I had known what you know now back when I was in middle school, would I have approached life very differently? But I had to start where I was and do what I could do. So you are now way ahead of the game. And I just want to encourage you to keep going. I would love to have another conversation with you all. Oh my goodness, because I think you all are just outstanding. And it's just fabulous to think about tracking your journeys as you continue to go forward, because I think you've got a lot to work with. So please work with it. Please work with it. Don't sit still. Work with it. Keep moving, because I think you're on a great track. So thank you.
They are. Mr. Sledge?
Yes, I can only echo what Dr. Slaughther said. As Maddie talked about, Ava talked about this World House. I think it's important that we think about King, who did talk about this beloved community that we need to be a part of. But it's also, as you learn about King, I want you to also think about the evolution of King, and the King who went beyond the "I have a dream" speech, but it was the King who advocated for better jobs, who advocated for higher wages, who talked about decent housing, who talked about quality education, the King who spoke out against the Vietnam War, the King who gave his life with sanitation workers who were part of a union. They were fighting for the rights of other people and for fair wages, for dignity. That is the King I want you to get to know. But as we talk about it, it's important that he moved away, and I'm finishing. I've talked about before. He talked about moving away from this societal complacency, and I think both of you talked about that, like creating your own vision for how you see the world, where you see the world, and where you think we should go. And I think it's as important for you and Maddie and Ava, is important for you to be a part of this conversation. And I so appreciate it, because I think it is not only important for you to hear from us, but it's so important, and even perhaps more important for us to hear from you, because this is shaping the world that we're moving toward. And, it's like that, it's almost like that quote that says, yesterday's, we always talk about the wins that we had and rest, and, we rest on the laurels, but it's yesterday's home run won't win today's game, or, and whether that's a baseball reference. So if you like football, it's yesterday's touchdown, or if you like basketball, yesterday's 3-pointer, whatever you want to call it, but that won't win today's game. Like, the fight continues, and we always have to be a part of that. And at some point we can start talking about other leaders who have followed the model of King. Like now we've elected Maxwell Frost, who's in Congress now, young, fought, was engaged in the Black Lives Matter protests in Florida, and arrested. And as they say, those very same streets that he was protesting on, he now represents as a member of Congress, the youngest in there. So it's not like we've abandoned King's ideas or you've abandoned them. We've just evolved in how we see them. And I think that's critically important. And having this conversation with the two of you certainly gives me hope. And I look forward to, if there's anything I can do to help in any way, please feel free to call on me. Thank you for having me as a part of this and letting me learn from the two of you. Thank you. I learned something from you too, Slaughther. So if you need to hear that.
So I'll start with Ava, then I'll go to Maddie, and then I'll give my closing remarks.
This was a wonderful opportunity. So thank you to Ms. Tina and her staff for allowing this opportunity. And thank you to Mr. Sledge and Dr. Slaughther for having this conversation with us. So I feel like just in this hour, I've grown a lot. And I think, honestly, reading this book and preparing for this session really opened my horizons. So thank you all.
Perfect.
I agree with Ava, and I'm gonna say May the 5th. Thank you, because it is very well deserved. I have been with HSCF for going on 3 years now,
3 years.
And I have changed so much within those 3 years. I've developed so many passions, and I've realized a lot about myself, and I really just think talking about this gives me a great opportunity to begin on a life that I have so very far ahead of me. And I just want to say thank you again for these opportunities.
Wow. So once again, I want to thank everyone, those that's in the Zoom cocoon that's with us, and those that's probably watching or will watch later on YouTube. I never seek accolades or anything for HSCF. I try to make sure that I curate spaces so that we can progress individually, internally, and together as a community. And the reason why I wanted us to, and I'm still going to have this conversation again next year, this same book, because it's so relevant, and just adding to the multiple layers of it, is because no one is one story. We all evolve. And I want to make sure it's not just King and his book, but it's also all those people that surround him that I want to unpack and I want to unfold in. And I also want more youth to be involved in these conversations. So this is one of many, I would say, sessions like this that we're going to continue to have. I want to make sure that we're addressing the truth. I want to make sure that we are addressing the issues, and that we create that safe space for us to talk about. And also, parents, I also want to encourage you. King, it was more than that I have a dream speech. He has evolved. He, partner, talk about the People's Campaign. A lot of people have absolutely no idea what the People's Campaign is all about. But as you start to unpack the multiple stories that's in a body, a person, it opens up the community of conversations that you can have, and how when you know more and when you know better, as Maya Angelou say, you do better. I end with that. I thank you all. I wish you all a wonderful and safe holiday weekend if you're here in the United States or wherever you are in the world. I wish you a wonderful and blessed weekend. And again, be intentional about what you listen to, who you are around, and make sure that you're driving change. And it starts now. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.